This is the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast.
This is where it all counts. This is why we're here. This is why each one of us are here.
And now, here's your host.
And we are back. This is the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Matt Caraccio, and the summer seminar series keeps rolling along as we begin to kind of, again, try to take you closer to the game. And our topic or theme for this summer is the player problem solver paradigm, as we try to unpack the nature of the problems that players are facing on the field. And throughout this series, we've tried to attack it from many different viewpoints, from the theoretical, and then as we transition more into the application or applied areas, it just seems like it takes on a different light and a different kind of understanding. And I am just really excited to bring in somebody who's living and breathing these ideas in his own practice. I am absolutely ecstatic to welcome QB Collective QB coach, Mr. Will Hewlett. Will, welcome to the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast.
Man, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to get a chance to chop it up here. I've listened to the podcast for quite some time now, so it's an honor to be on. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I mean, Will, honestly, the pleasure is entirely mine, as I really frequently say with my guests, because I'm really a fan of yours, and I'm a fan of everybody that's on this series because of just the out-of-the-box, rich, thoughtful, kind of willing to be vulnerable type of thinking that I think everybody displays. And that's an example really for myself to follow. So I'm kind of really I'm using everybody on this presenting show to kind of inspire me to continue in that direction as well. And a lot of our conversations, Will, that we've had over the course of the last year has really been something that I called you and said, listen, you have to be a part of this podcast, this series in particular, just because of your unique position in the world of football and really your I guess I want to say your unique approach to your particular position in this world of football. So I'm going to start there and say, Will, you know what? Can you unpack a little bit about your journey as a quarterback coach and what that really entailed, where you were, and now maybe who you're striving to become?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've got a pretty unique journey. I've arrived at this. I'm in this crazy world of private quarterback coaching, it's observing from the outside. I'm sure people have got all different types of opinions on it, but it's really all driven from a passion I had when I was about 13 years old to become an NFL quarterback. And the thing that made that a little bit outlandish was that I actually was born and raised in Australia. I grew up playing rugby, soccer. And I just had this obsession with American football, and then I've always been able to throw things well, so I kind of gravitated towards the quarterback position. So I would be the my buddy would be Jerry Rice, I'd be Joe Montana, and this would be at some lunchtime in Sydney, Australia. We'd be playing catch, and so my goal was always to be an elite player in the game. And so that kind of drove me to, by my senior year of high school, I decided I wanted to pursue this. I'm going to move across the country. So I moved to a high school in Florida. And that kind of took me through a journey into college football. And, I went to a couple different colleges. It didn't work out. And when I finished, I had a little bit of bitterness towards my playing career because I really felt like I underachieved as a player. I was 6'5", 4'7", 40, 220 pounds. Had a decently strong arm, and so I felt like that I wanted to learn as a player, but there was no one that could give me the specifics of the position. It was always, hey, you're just thinking too much about it. You're try this, and then if that doesn't work, I'm not sure. No one could ever go in any layer, deeper than one, with any issues with ball flight or just general throwing. And so a couple of years after I finished up being a player, I had this burning desire to get back into the game and kind of took that, I think I want to be a coach. And instead of going the traditional coaching route, it's about 2005, I thought, I think I want to kind of start a quarterback academy. My high school coach quickly told me, he's like, no offense, Will, like who the heck's Will Hewlett, and why would anyone go to your academy? And it was a really, awakening moment, but it was truthful. It was good feedback. And so I partnered up with a guy by the name of Darren Slack. And that kind of took me on a huge journey. Here I am, almost, how many years later, 15, 14 years later, and part of the quarterback collective, and have been involved in the private and camp coaching industry for quite some time. So a long, frustrating journey as an athlete through injuries and underachieving. That's kind of crafted, I think, who I am in a lot of ways as a coach now, and here we are.
Well, you know what? And I'm going to ask you maybe to dive a little bit deeper into that. As people maybe are listening, they may bring polarizing feelings about, the private quarterback coach industry and what that is and entails, and colleagues and people that, it's worked for me, it didn't work for me. I mean, I ask you only because we're not necessarily pointing out anybody, but there are philosophies that are very different in your industry. And I don't know if we should paint with such a broad brush. Is that fair? Very fair.
It's generally speaking a very it's not a very qualified industry, and I mean that by listen.
Well, this is the truth. Is there like a professional quarterback certification that I can go online, so to speak, take, practice, be observed, and be kind of, I guess I want to say decreed or, endowed with being a quarterback coach?
There are some out there, but it's not in, it's not structured in a way that, listen, if you're sick and you're going to go see the doctor, that person has a degree and they've gone through a number of years of schooling. And so the thing is with quarterback coaching, it's like if you're going to go see a private quarterback coach, well, that guy might have just been an elite player or just right place, right time, trained someone locally that ended up going to the NFL. It's so the qualifications is really right now it's an Instagram account. It's a little bit of social media prowess. And then if you can kind of talk the lingo a little bit, you can also have a QB coach and a private quarterback coach, and you can get clients and make money and feel, I guess, good about yourself, attempting to get quarterbacks better.
Well, and I think this is where we kind of begin to talk maybe more about who you are as a coach and that journey into your own understanding and what you try to do with your players. I mean, Darren Slack, to me in the industry is one of those monuments in terms of, quarterback education. And of course, people that he's worked with. He's somebody that I've known for a long time in terms of his work, not personally. And I've always been very impressed about what he brought to the game. So, I mean, if we're talking about, references and a list of pupils, it's clear to me, I know where you come from. So I'm curious as if you can take us into what the QB Collective is for a moment. Sure. And then as we kind of talk about the QB Collective, we'll talk a little bit maybe about, your philosophy on what you're trying to do as a teacher, because that's what you end up being.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Quarterback Collective is run, founded by a gentleman by the name of Richmond Flowers, and Richmond was a former NFL player, and then very briefly, and then a former NFL coach. And when he realized that coaching wasn't for him, and coach representation was a different direction he felt like he'd be more successful in. But the Richmond was a part of the Mike Shanahan Redskins organization, which is now exploding as the tree of coaches. And so the Quarterback Collective was his idea when he came out as a player and then as a coach. He felt like, man, if I had been armed with the right information, I could have extended my playing career considerably. And now I'm seeing these coaches that are having success. And it's because of a philosophy of teaching and a methodology that is you're seeing right in front of our eyes explode into many different organizations. And so he wanted to find a way to bridge the gap from the NFL to high school. he's put together an annual event and a number of other different pieces of the program with, we've got this company by the name of Sports Sense, which does testing for, decision making and comprehension of complex problems. And then we've got this unique experience where we bring in, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, Rich Scangarello, Mike McDaniels, the list goes on of guys that are currently coaching NFL teams and coordinators and position coaches, and put them on a high school field with a bunch of high school quarterbacks and see if we can't mesh the information and give these guys a different perspective. And that's essentially what it is. And it's in year 4 of existence.
Well, I've seen plenty of those types of videos, commentary, and amazing things floating around about the QB Collective, and it's something that it intrigued me to initially reach out to you, and we had our really rich discussions about the position, and it brings me to this idea of really talking about. You've worked with quarterbacks, that's what you're doing. I would want to know in general. What do you feel really the problems are, or the types of ideas, or the position itself? Describe the quarterback position to me. I could be your student day one, and you're kind of looking at me as this, hopefully, maybe I'm athletic. I don't know. But you're looking at me and saying, I got to make this guy a quarterback. And you're saying, here's what I think the nature of the position is, because that kind of drives, I'm sure, some of your instruction in terms of where you kind of sit in terms of your foundational understandings of the position, your philosophies and views of the position. Who is and what is the quarterback position in the game of football? We'll forget mastery level. What is the quarterback position, if that's even definable?
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think there's some consistent traits that stand out amongst all levels of successful quarterbacks. I think number one, there's a level of confidence that kind of supersedes, many players on the field, where their ability to, take the pressure for, they got to kind of put the team on their back. They're an extension of the coach. They've got to be able to make mistakes and bounce back. So I think at the core of everything, there is a level of confidence that you need to be a quarterback. And it's, I give it one of those things. It's almost a level of confidence sometimes where you don't know well enough not to know that you shouldn't make that throw, but you're confident in your arm and you do make that throw. And so it's a level that is generally unflappable. I think that's been something that stood out in quarterbacks. There's a belief in what they can do. Then I really feel like, your ability to deliver the football is equally as important as confidence. I think they're tied together, and we talk about leadership and things that are other important traits of quarterback. But the reality is, if you're not a good thrower, if you can't spin the ball, you're going to have a problem gaining credibility as a player. When that's basically the definition of a Q. It's someone that can get the ball from point A to point B. And of course, there's been guys like Tim Tebow that haven't done it as pretty, that have had success, but you reach a point in the position where, if you cannot deliver the football effectively, it catches up to you. It doesn't matter how good a leader you are. So I believe that, confidence and your ability to naturally throw the football are very much tied together. And then finally, I think, maybe this is more personal for me, but I believe that a level of toughness, I think, is also, something that ties in with the position. Although sometimes, we don't necessarily see that, but I feel like it's a position where it's so out in the open. Everything is so visual. You have to, how you react is a lot of the times how your teammates and coaches react. So, being able to deal with discomfort and disappointment and on all levels. And I think those three things really stand out to me at the quarterback position.
And what I think stands out to you as I kind of reflect back on several episodes in this series, I think back to a couple of things. One of them, I think back to statements that were made by Cameron Joss, as well as Fergus Connolly about these, coactives of the physical, the tactical, the technical, and the psychological. And I hear elements of you resonating. Those resonate with what things that you said. You're talking about delivering the football, a thrower of a football, the confidence, the resiliency, if we're going to call it that, toughness. Yeah. I hear all those things, and yet I hear also a lot of things that resonate with Sean Mishka in terms of functionality, in terms of we're not going to overly dissect this. We are also thinking about the competency in terms of the task at hand and your ability to kind of meet those demands and deliver the football, but also understanding that, reference to your Tim Tebow discussion, also this idea that, you have to be able to adapt to a myriad of situations. And when you do hit those issues, those things that you can't, then you begin to see where maybe your deficiencies are, limitations are. So I'm curious, in terms of, delivering the football and where you came in terms of your journey, were you more of a, there's a right way or a wrong way earlier in your career? Do you still subscribe to that?
Sure.
Who were you, if I were saying to you, coach, I really think I have the ability to play this game at a high level. Who are you as a coach? What would you tell me about who you think you are as a coach in terms of helping me get to that next level?
Yeah. Well, this is a rabbit hole we're about to go down.
That's okay. The whole series is about rabbit holes.
There we go. Good. So early on as a player, and then early in my coaching career, there wasn't a one way to do it. The problem is I didn't know any way to do it. I just kind of did it, and sometimes it was good, and sometimes it wasn't. And I think the thing we have to understand about throwing a football is that, there's 32 starting professional quarterbacks in the world. There's probably close to, 80 professional quarterbacks in the NFL. That's not very many. And so it's a very difficult position to achieve a high level of as a player at. And so as a thrower, there was this gray area where it's like, well, I think this is how it should be. And it's such a highly technical move, a technical skill that you get instant feedback, unlike kicking a soccer ball or even throwing a baseball. If you don't do it right, the ball doesn't spin. And I think that's one of the most clear feedback tools that you can see, is that the ball is just not going to travel the way it should if you're doing something incorrectly. And that doesn't mean you can't complete passes throwing wobbly footballs, but spin rate and a good ball flight, it helps with accuracy, and it's also a good indicator that things are working efficiently. And so then I kind of shifted into this, well, there's only one way to do it mindset. Very rigid in my thought process in terms of key positions of the throw. The elbow must go here, the arm must go here. This must happen by this point, and if it doesn't, you're failing as a thrower. And that was a good chunk of my coaching career, where it was one lens that I looked at everything through, and if you didn't fit that, you were doing it incorrectly. And then I had a young man by the name of Morgan Mahalik kind of come into my life. He was Jared Goff's backup at Marine Catholic, and we started working together, and he couldn't throw a spiral. And you could tell there was a lack of confidence. There was a lack of, hey, I'm probably going to get moved positions, and he's going into his sophomore year. We looked at the ball, and he was just holding the ball like Jared was holding it. And I was like, here, just move your finger here and then adjust your hand this way. And then literally the next throw was a spiral. And then the next one after that was a spiral. And so it was on and on. And then it just kind of took ownership. And then all of a sudden Morgan is, one of the only quarterbacks in the country to get FBS offers as a backup. He was Jared Goff's backup. They'd be warming up on the field, and college coaches would come down and, well, which one's Jared? So he was one of the most elite throwers in the country, a year behind, and ended up committing and going to Oregon after his senior year. But what I realized about Morgan is that I started changing things mechanically that I thought I needed. You need a quicker release. I'm going to tighten the back of your throw up. I'm going to, move your front arm a little bit differently. And I realized that, he had a wind up, I guess you could say, a traditional wind up. But man, it was smooth. And he threw with such great velocity. He was so accurate. And it just hit me. I was like, why am I changing these things? Like, what am I doing? Like, every college coach sees this kid throw, and they love it. It's natural, and it's fluid, and that really hit me with a ton of bricks. I just realized, like, maybe I think I'm overdoing it here as a coach. I'm giving too much instruction. Maybe I'm not looking at this the right way. And so that really shifted my mindset in terms of how I viewed throwing as a skill, and then how I teach throwing as a skill. And that was the biggest change for me. So now I'd say at the fundamental, sequence level, hips, torso, arm, and then internal rotation of the shoulder, and then the deceleration, hips, shoulder, internal rotation of the arm, it's the same. But on the outside, there's individual differences that we have to allow for. Variability, I guess, would be a good word. And that's something that you have to allow athletes to embrace. Otherwise, you're gonna crush them as a coach.
Well, no, and I think what I'm sensing from you is something that I think begins to speak to this gray area where some listeners might be saying, oh, you're just telling everybody to figure it out on their own. Mm-hmm. You're not really saying that there's any type of rhyme or reason. And I love what you just said there. It's not, I don't think we're saying that there's no rhyme and reason. There can be a sequence, but the idea that there's a bandwidth of correct movement within that sequence is something that I think may end up being something that we forget to acknowledge. Right. Like, is that fair? Or am I, because I don't want to put words in your mouth. You're the expert here, but I mean, it just resonates with me that I think there's a very big difference between a sequence of maybe movements and maybe a technical prescription for how exactly to execute the movement.
Right.
Is that true? Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this has been a, discovery process myself for quite some time now, and what to coach and what not to coach, right? And some of the things that have stood out, where I've struggled in the world of, self-organization, ecological dynamics, constraint-based learning. And then I find myself feeling, gosh, I just really want to isolate this for a moment and just focus on this one very specific cue. And so I go back and forth with that. And the one thing that stands out to me at all times is because, you listen to the skill acquisition world out there. And I think a lot of the focus has been on, sports like soccer and hockey and rugby and so, this free play, we'll figure it out kind of as we go along, let the movements evolve. And I'm 100% on board with that concept. I believe that a lot of those things are true. Where sometimes as a coach, I struggle with those is I tell a player to change the position of his wrist, and he does, and there's immediate improvement. And so I go, should I just let him figure that out on his own? Or, is this something that where, what's my role in this? And so there are things to the throw, I think, that are very specific that if they don't happen, within the context of the movement, you're going to get immediate feedback on the ball that's not good. I mean, you're going to see it just doesn't work the way it should. And I think in other throwing sports where it's, I know that the specific, how specific you have to rotate your hand in terms of throwing, a fastball, a curveball, and pitching. Yeah, there's things that they have to do very specifically there, but, they're not limited by time and distance. There's so much, so many personal differences because they're driving off a mound and lengths and different body sizes. And so quarterback is this timed, limited time, constrained movement that's in a pocket where people are throwing at you. So I think that, it makes the action restricted in some ways. And I think that's where we kind of evolve as throwers. You see that come out in the guys. It's kind of an evolution of the game, and then the size and shape of the football force a couple things that have to happen.
Well, and I think you really raise an important question, both on the, technical kind of biomechanist level of where the wrist, how the wrist should be situated. But also, I think what's interesting is, and I'd love to explore this, is obviously these motions and these sequences of events aren't happening in complete isolation. They're happening as a play unravels, as a play emerges, as receivers come open. Take me through what it's like to coach that emergent play at the snap of the ball, because I do think that we have a tendency to talk very mechanically and almost like a motor programming, mental processing. I'm going to look at this guy first, this guy second, this guy third. And if I break stride in that, then I'm off structure. Cause you hear a lot about that, Will, on structure, off structure. Yeah. Where does the teammates, the environment around them, meaning down, distance, maybe weather or hash mark, where do some of those ideas play within that shaping of that motion? Because I'm sure as you're watching players, you'll see issues, limitations about their mechanics, or mechanical issues arise in some areas or sometimes, but not in others. And there may be that discontinuity at times. And I know your eye is very trained and you see way more detail than somebody of my ilk sitting down and watching. But I'm sure there's even inconsistency within that. And where does the entirety of the game fit within the shaping of the quarterback's, I want to say, competency of their actual position?
Yeah, I think this is one of those areas that I spend a lot of time trying to understand better as a coach, and where I listen and I study a lot on the concept of free play, and it's becoming a popular subject in soccer. And the general gist of it is that it's constraint-based coaching. We're letting the athlete self-discover how to work through the problems that are presented in the environment, and instead of giving them very specific, hard, and fast rules, they're gonna find the better way, and they might not find that right away. It might take some time, and then eventually they'll come out nice and shiny on the end of it and be elite soccer players. So the thing about offense in American football is that it is in the unstructure that the defense, the chaos the defense provides us as an offense. There is an innate level of timing and precision that's practiced in the position, and I think within that timeline, that's very specific to every play. There's going to be variability, for athletes in terms of route running and how they attack particular routes, and the time spent, with the quarterbacks and the wide receivers and the running backs, I think helps understand, the guardrails that each position has and how far outside that, they can go off those guardrails before it's like, okay, we're not going to throw the ball there. So I think the way that's affected the position of quarterback is that, you can very quickly be late in delivering the football. So everything kind of, there's a point when the receiver is open, they're not open, they're open, and then not open again. And there's these windows of opportunity that present themselves in the play. And I think from a coaching standpoint, what you're trying to do is put your player in a position to be able to pull the trigger, so to say, when that window is available. But it's sometimes you got to be able to pull it before it's available, so they intersect, right? And so there's these problems we deal with at the quarterback position where one little mishap in timing, whether it's a misstep in footwork or it's an awkward delivery, affects the outcome of the play in its entirety. after the snap. Then there's also the other part of the game that happens, when nothing goes to plan on offense, and then you've got an athlete that has to, adapt and kind of make something happen to extend the play. I think that's almost another part of quarterback that's, I don't want to say it's secondary to the very structured side of the game. It's something that's equally as valuable. And you'll see guys that make a living more of that, unstructured, off-platform type play. Like, I guess we're about to see Kyler Murray. We'll see how that goes. Guys that can manipulate defenders much greater than others. And then you've got guys like Brady who are that guy doesn't move barely at all. And he's going to make you pay within the structure of the play. I hope that kind of,
No. It's beautiful, and I'm gonna play not devil's advocate. I'm gonna play more or less like something that we would have a conversation about. Mm-hmm. So like and you could correct me. I mean, every time we talk, I'm always asking you, correct me. I mean, these are my theories, my understandings, my own ability or my own thoughts of how to apply this to understanding the problems the players are facing. And I'm wondering if Brady himself, even though there is a very minimal amount of actual noticeable movement laterally or vertically, there is movement within that pocket to a significant degree. I mean, do his feet ever really stop? Because I do feel that he ends up becoming the consummate, you talk about Kyler Murray, we talk about Patrick Mahomes, we talk about maybe what Doug Flutie could have been.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And we talk about these guys and we're saying, but there's guys like Brady, so those guys play longer. Those guys like RG3 and maybe Kyler Murray and maybe those guys are going to be more mobile. Well, they don't. So what are you trying to say? You're trying to say that we need to have guys more like that, but yet Brady's the one who's winning. So why are we not still looking for players like him? And I subscribe, or at least I believe that it's a misunderstanding of exactly the amount of movement doesn't mean that there's no movement.
Sure. Yeah.
Tell me what that means. Like,
take
that, run with it.
Yeah. Jeremy Bates, who was the offensive coordinator for the New York Jets last season, really well-respected offensive coordinator, jokingly says that I think he's kind of serious, actually, that Tom Brady's the most athletic quarterback in the NFL. And he says that because the efficiency of his movement in the pocket is, it's kind of at a different level. I think, when you watch players develop over time, there's certain things that I think that you have to embrace as a coach. I think that's the most important thing, understanding like what's their capabilities as a quarterback, and let's embrace those. So let's look at Tom Brady, for example. He did hold the record for the slowest NFL 40 time as a quarterback at the combine. And then I think Ryan Mallett broke that record. Interestingly enough, the Patriots also drafted Ryan Mallett. So there's a key for you guys. If you want to be drafted by the Patriots, run slow 40s. And so we've got this other end of the spectrum where you've got these explosive quarterbacks that can extend the play. Let's look at, I think Daniel Jones ran like a 4.6 40. You've got, Kyler Murray, these guys that are going to do stuff outside the pocket. Then you've got maybe like kind of like a hybrid brand. You Patrick Mahomes, your Aaron Rodgers, that are going to not necessarily push the ball downfield with their legs, but they're going to keep the clock. The play is just as dangerous outside the pocket as it is in. But I think what happens, if you're blind, you get very good at hearing and smelling. If you don't have a rocket arm, you get great at anticipation, and if you don't, you don't move on. And so you kind of double down on your strengths. And I think Brady's ability to anticipate, see what's happening before it's happening. And he's got such a massive library. It's not even fair because he just keeps adding to the library of fronts and formations. He understands the limitations of defenders probably better than the defenders do themselves. And so that kind of builds, and it makes it almost easier for him. I always thought it was interesting that Peyton Manning and Tom Brady were the two least blitzed quarterbacks in the NFL. When you think you'd blitz the most unathletic guys, if you blitz them, you pay. And so I think that if you're Kyler Murray and you're his coach, are you really going to lock him down in the pocket like you would Brady? No, you're not. You're going to move him around. Russell Wilson's a fantastic example. I remember one statistic from 1 year, 34% of his passing plays were off of play action. And so they're going to manipulate the game in a fashion to really, again, build on his strengths to get him outside of the pocket, or to give him opportunities where defenders are in positions where they have to make a decision. Do I go after the quarterback or do I stay on my man? And so I think it's not let's go after more Tom Brady's. It's understanding, hey, here's what our player's strengths are. Here's what his weaknesses are. And let's double down on those and build around him in that fashion.
Well, no, I think what's so interesting about that is, you might notice me writing as we're talking often, because there's a lot of things that you're alluding to and so many different directions to go. And one of the directions actually comes from, and forgive me for if they're listening to this, I don't know exactly who tweeted it out. It might have actually been one of the presenters. It might have been Jay Moore, actually tweeted out a synopsis or a couple of highlight statements from Andy Reid, talking about Patrick Mahomes from last year in terms of his, preseason type of observations, what he was doing in OTAs and whatnot. And the synopsis of it was essentially he had thrown several interceptions, but he was still making good decisions and he was moving around a lot. And people were commenting, do you want to change that? And Andy Reid commented something along the lines of, why would I want to change that? I want him to be who he is. Yeah. And I think that's very poignant, and I want to know where you feel the coach sits within that system that is really that coach-player relationship, because I wonder to what degree, are we – I'm not saying we're forcing players to be somebody that they're not, where we're allowing them the opportunity to be who they are. What is that when you hear that? Because you circled around that topic, it seems, a lot in that previous discussion. As a coach yourself, what do you think about that when you hear things like that?
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation to have for coaches, and I try to be careful with how I think about it. I always think it's interesting. I've heard some good Mahomes stories, and you see him, the good old throwback across the field, across his body, and that's something we preach as coaches. Don't ever do that. What I think is interesting is that, there's two levels. I think as a coordinator, one of the things that we need your quarterback to do is to understand, the purpose behind the offense and to really see what the coach is trying to accomplish with the offense. Once they get that they understand at the core of it, I think you got to kind of let them go. And I think this is where I hear coaches struggle, and I've heard stories about coaches struggling with quarterbacks. Either they're so limited by either the progression or the way that the play develops that, I remember one player I had was with the Dolphins a couple years back, and he said that honestly it didn't really matter how he went through the progression. He'd always end up back at a check down. And so it was almost like he was so frustrated because if he did exactly what the coach said, it would always come back to a check down. And you kind of think maybe that's almost how Alex Smith played, right? Like he was the epitome of, I'm going to do it exactly how it's supposed to be. If I'm not sure, I'm bringing it back down. And the guy made a career out of doing that. He's an awesome quarterback. But then you got to wonder, like, hey, what if we let guys go a little bit? We see if they can test their abilities. And I always felt like as a quarterback, as a player, you were scolded in competition if you made a bad decision. But how do you learn what your limitations are as a quarterback if you can't make bad decisions? I always struggle with that. I have a young man this year, had a really great year in college football last year, and the offensive coordinator, I kind of gave him permission this year. We want you to test your limits in practice. Take throws that you didn't think you could make last year. Just try it with no repercussions. And I'm thinking, well, why don't we do that all the time? So, and maybe the problem there is that it's tough for these guys to get any kind of consistency and movement. And I think as a coach, you need, to know what you're getting snap to snap. But the guys that, consistently stand out in this industry as players are the ones that, within the play, outside the pocket, inside the pocket, extend it, make something happen. And it's almost like, the coach is on the sideline, the quarterback breaks out the pocket. He's going, no. Yes. Great play. Right. It's that feeling of like, don't do that. Oh, wow. Do that. I think Brett Favre played his entire career that way. Like, I don't want you to scramble on this play no matter what. And then he wins the game. There's still those kinds of stories. So as a balancing act, I think certainly we have to play. And then the argument I think I always get is like, well, I don't have Patrick Mahomes. I don't have Brett Favre. I get it.
But you have Michael Smith or Peter Malloy or whoever they are. How do you know what you have?
Exactly. If you're always stuck in like, you got to follow the rules, then I think you put yourselves in a position where you might get good quarterback play, but you never get exceptional quarterback play.
Well, now I'm going to ask you to kind of maybe change or transition gears, because I think there were a lot of things to take out of that from things that we've talked about, from, allowing people to kind of scale their own abilities, that idea of, calibration and allowing them to learn to attune or be sensitive to new information by allowing them to explore. A lot of those ideas are inherent in many of the things that you just said. And that coach-player relationship is something that I know a lot of researchers are starting to look at more intimately as being something that we have to be careful of and take great care, and maybe the words that we use, and maybe,
sure.
It's not, maybe it's not, and again, this is not a critique. It's just reflecting
sure.
on what we said earlier. It's more like maybe not saying like, hey, like you say this all the time, hey, consider your ball flight right now. When that ball left your hand, attention to your ball flight, and then maybe using that as a way of resonating with what you're doing mechanically. I mean, I know you experiment with that stuff all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, as we transition to another piece in a moment, what in the recent past year have been things that you find are working for you that you might share with a coach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've arrived at my sessions. I feel like that when I train quarterbacks, I'm essentially in indie time for 60, 90 minutes, right? And so at your average team, you're going to have 10 minutes of indie time of practice, if that, and that's 12, 15 weeks of a year. So it's not a whole lot of indie time. I've been doing indie time. Some years I've hit 1,000 hours of indie time, right? So I've done a lot of it, and so you find yourself digging into this position very, very deeply, and it's helped me arrive at some, I think, pretty core philosophies on how to help athletes achieve a higher level. And one of the things I talk about whenever I work a new athlete is like, I just want you to play at 100% of your capability, and I ask that question: what do you think you're operating on right now? And it's always a setup, because, whatever answer they're going to say is going to be wrong. Hopefully by the end of the session, we're going to be operating on a lot more. But, some of the things that have been, especially in the last 12 months, I think I naturally arrived at the constraint-based learning style of teaching, where all I'm trying to do is manipulate the environment to help the athlete discover the solution. And I guess that I'm nudging them towards self-discovery, because, again, this is concept of self-organization, right? That we will kind of figure out how to do it if we just leave it alone. And I believe that, but I feel as a coach, you can accelerate that process if you ask the right questions, and use the right terminology. And I think, just simply asking, releasing a player, telling you that, I always start by saying, like, don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Like, I don't want you to make me feel good about myself. I don't care how it feels. I want you to describe it. And you let them speak whatever language, like I speak all quarterback languages, whatever the feeling is, just describe it. And sometimes I try not to put the answer in their mouth, but sometimes like, hey, maybe it feels awkward, but did it feel awkward and smooth? And help them kind of craft like, okay, that didn't feel the same as it did before, but it felt better. And I'm like, okay, we can dig into that, right? And this is typically speaking is when we're trying to, I see a lot of players, I work with a lot of players that have some underlying, I guess I don't want to use the word problem, but there's something that's either been taught in or, developed over the years that just doesn't flow, doesn't work. It gets them out of sequence. It puts them in a position where they're not consistent. You can tell they just don't feel good about how they're doing it, and they've done it thousands of times. It doesn't feel good. So you got to, create an environment where they feel okay. It's not a competition. It's. I want you to have permission to make bad throws, but let's work on changing this skill pattern, this movement pattern. And, you've got to, you bounce back between kind of the block and random style of coaching. There's some things that I'm going to let them, the interesting thing about block practice is that if you put an athlete through a very repetitive drill, understanding that there is, no two repetitions that are the same. But if you constrain them to a very, maybe it's just step and throw, right? It's just playing catch 10 yards apart. If you give them enough repetitions in there, they can start to dial in and really get a great feel for everything that's going in on their body. And so they have this own discovery within this very isolated, small part of playing football. And I think that's important to let athletes explore, because once an athlete knows, what feels wrong or what didn't feel right on that throw, they do a very good job of reorganizing again and correcting it. And we say great one throw correction. And you see that it takes one throw, I got it. I know what I did wrong, so nudging to self-discovery, man, just kind of propping them along with little, questions, thought-provoking, scenarios that helps them feel it out.
No, and I think that there's a lot there we can go into. And I would ask that, as people listen to this, we'll certainly let them know where they can follow you towards the end. But I think this is why I think you hear in Coach Hewlett's mind just this idea of constantly challenging himself. And that's something that I really appreciate about you as a coach, and something I always try to do in my own craft, like asking myself those questions. Yeah. And so now I was wondering if you can kind of take us into that room of being the above average educated fan at the position, and take us maybe into that mind of yours in terms of the popular vernacular that's used to kind of talk about the position, where we as evaluators or people that are interested in evaluation or analysts of the position, not where we get it wrong, but maybe where we paint with too broad of a stroke. What kind of comes to mind as you watch players and you coach players at the position? Often you'll hear a myriad of things arise in terms of, well, it was a processing error. Well, it was a physical error. Well, it was, an error. It wasn't really his fault. It was a lineman's fault. I'm just curious, as you watch the players playing on Saturday and Sunday and Friday night, what are some of the things that you kind of think not your pet peeves, but the biggest misnomers that might be sitting out there in the evaluative spectrum around the quarterback position? Are there things that resonate with you as being like, I just wish I could tell people this?
Yeah, there's tons of those. One of my favorite.
We're laying up. I'm ready. I'm good.
My favorite one is he threw it off his back foot. That's the one that's got to go. Wow, he threw that off his back foot. What an amazing throw. Wow, he threw that off his back foot. It was an interception. Okay, the game is played off your back foot. So it's how the game is played. It's constantly under pressure. And a lot of the times we're regressing. You can't always get your weight, moving at the target. And so I think people need to understand. I see it in coaching a lot when people are breaking down quarterback workouts. They're like, it's a throw on the run. And it's like, well, he didn't get his weight at the target. I'm like, okay, that's not how the game's played. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. I think the tendency, when we're evaluating quarterbacks, there's a lot that goes into it. And I think at the NFL level, one thing I don't think people realize how much matters is actually coaching. A or within the system, what the player is allowed to do. And I think some of the best examples would be, Jared Goff, I think, is a fantastic example for us because of, his rookie year. He's a bust. He's not going to be a guy. And then he's a Pro Bowler, And yeah, that comes with maturity and so on. But, within a system, I think that coach-player relationship really, really matters. So being partnered with a great staff, great coach, I think goes a long way at the NFL level. College and high school, talent can generally overcome a lot of issues, whether it's poor personnel, poor coaching. They're just going to get it done. One of the other things I think you hear evaluators talk about is maybe quickness of release. And I think people mistake an elongated movement as something that's slow. Or that, you could say that Sam Darnold winds up, that guy gets the ball out faster than just about anyone when he has to. Carson Wentz, another guy with somewhat of a wind up. His throw adapts. If he's throwing a now screen, he shrinks it to fit the now screen. If it's a longer throw, it goes a little bit longer. So, and hey, listen, maybe he works on getting it a little bit faster and tighter every single year, but there's a point where, you don't want to get it too tight. So I think there's that flexibility in individual movement where we're trying to put everyone in that box. You could say that Patrick Mahomes has a windup. Do you think anyone would change that guy's release? You're out of your mind. That guy's got one of the best arms we've ever seen. And so I think understanding, allowing individual movements, differences between athletes, I think that's something that's needs to be important. And then, I deal with it in the college world, and it's changing, but the good old height thing, right? Like, we're addicted to 6'5", and it's I think the position, there's plenty of 6'5" quarterbacks, myself included, that couldn't see the field well, being tall. Shorter guys can certainly make plays if they're just given the opportunity. So I think we naturally gravitate to the taller quarterbacks. And that's changed. Look at Kyler Murray. He gets drafted first overall, and he's 5'9", 5'10", whatever he is. So those are probably the three main things that kind of stand out to me as things that have been poorly evaluated. Maybe one other thing is that playing at I think there's something to be said about your production regardless of the system that you're in. I think great quarterbacks tend to whether they're running the air raid or they're running, some spread or pro style, whatever the case is, generally speaking, these guys are going to be, if they're accurate within that system, that should translate to other systems as well. So kind of systemizing guys, I think, is a mistake that's sometimes made as evaluators.
Well, no, and I would definitely want to echo a point that really has evolved for me more is when I'm watching a player within a particular system, I have to be cognizant of the types of throws or the types of situations that the players that they're playing in or playing with are going to be in, so to speak, at the next level. In other words, not every pass is necessarily an quote unquote NFL pass. If any of these are really NFL passes at all. But the idea of really asking myself, what is the problems they're going to face at the NFL level, and to what degree does this myriad of snaps that I'm watching transfer to those situations to the best of my ability or the capability of that game, so to speak, or that exposure is, as we move forward. I think broad strokes are bad. I think within every particular system, there are NFL throws. It's not the system.
Right.
It's not like, he's just a system guy. I think that's too broad of a stroke. I think we sell ourselves short of common sense, to be honest with you. Because, what do you think about, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah, no,
I think so. For actually some time now, I've wondered if quarterbacks that play in an air raid system, and I know I'll get a lot of grief from the NFL world for this, but I think there's something to be said for attempting 500 passes in one season. and so maybe you play in a pro style offense, you attempt 170 or 220 or 300. But if you start for 3 years, you attempt 500 passes a year. That's 1,500 passes. That's I don't know what else replaces that. Sometimes you're playing 2 football seasons in 1 football season. So I think we've got to look at it like, hey, if a guy can throw, he can throw. If a guy can process, he can process. He didn't make up the offense, right? It's not his choice. So I think that's one of the things that we've got to, consider there is that how do they produce within the system, that the system doesn't really matter in college when we're going to the NFL.
Yeah, no. And I think that, one of those things I'd love to kind of begin as we kind of begin to take this show maybe down to its kind of final leg, because I mean, it really has offered a lot in terms of looking at these different areas. Well, if somebody's listening to this show and they're saying, what are the concrete, most salient points you would want to leave them? Coach, evaluator, fan, anything about that quarterback position that you really would want to leave as a take home. What would that sound like? What would you try to leave our listenership or anybody listening to this? What would you leave them with in terms of the position itself and maybe what we need to understand as we move forward in understanding this position within this game?
I think that it's really, really hard to play. give the guys on Sunday some slack and Saturday some slack. It's hard. It's a really hard position to coach and to play. I think you got to really appreciate some of the greats out there, and it's one of those things. It's such a I'm so enamored by the position still. I've been assessed since I'm 13. I'm almost 40 years old. I'm still learning every single day about the position. I'm obsessed with it. And I think people get bitten by the QB bug. It's just great. I think if we continue to share, ideas and thoughts and knowledge on the position, it's gotten a lot better in the coaching world on the technical side of things. I think coaches have moved the needle for the most part. There's still some, questionable things that are done out there. I think, teams are evolving on how they treat quarterbacks and look quarterbacks. Yeah, man, it's a blessing to be in this world. And I think, I just want to help other guys appreciate it and learn more about it as much as possible.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you one final question, which unfortunately comes towards the end of that amazing kind of ending, but I got to ask it anyway. Yeah. It's just something that is always kind of beginning to kind of weigh on me in terms of this idea of understanding the position in terms of everything that is information around you. When you were playing the position, when you speak to your athletes and they're talking about playing the position, to what degree are they aware of the capabilities of the players around them? Does that shape their behavior in any way?
Yes, I absolutely do think it shapes their behavior. I mean, you can just talk to any quarterback. It's there's again, it ties back to that confidence, the level of confidence that you have that you can put that ball in that direction and that guy's going to take care of it for you. I think Aaron Rodgers has a very specific offseason camp process where he's going to throw those 50-50 balls. He's really just trying to see what that guy can do. And so that certainly changes, I think, how you approach the position as a player if you understand what the surrounding athletes are capable of or not capable of. And I think that's also what makes a great quarterback is truly understanding that and putting your buddies and teammates in the best positions to succeed as well.
He is Will Hewlett of the QB Collective. I don't think you could have asked for anything more from this discussion, and I think it opens up such a myriad of places for you to go, not only as an evaluator, but as a coach, to kind of begin to investigate your own understanding of this position. Will, thank you so much for being a guest on the Saturday Sunday Football Podcast.
Matt, thanks for having me. Appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
So, Will, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to follow you, if they just want more of what you have to say, how can they get in contact with you? How can they kind of subscribe to your ideas?
Sure. Check out, I believe it's qbcollective.com is the main website. Personal Twitter is at Will Hewlett, and then I believe my Instagram at Will Hewlett, same thing. I post probably more quarterback stuff on Twitter. My Instagram's a mess of personal stuff and my farm and chickens and sometimes some quarterback stuff. So that's where you can find me.
I got to tell you, on behalf of myself and the entire listening base, thank you so much for being a guest. And to all of you out there that listen, thank you so much for giving us, obviously, that most precious thing that you have, which is your time, and listening to us and listening to this discussion. I hope you stay subscribed, and I hope that you continue to follow this really incredible series with these amazing presenters like Coach Hewlett about really the nature of the problems that these players are facing on the field. On behalf of myself, Will, and the rest of the Saturday to Sunday Football podcast, thank you so much for joining us, and please join us next time as the summer seminar series rolls along as we take you from Saturday to Sunday.